Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on our website, thewww.wine. Hello, everybody. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing all right, Mark. Yourself?
Everything is just great, and we're excited today. Not only are we doing another liquor-related show, but we have two local people here with us from Franklin. Beth and Patrick Downing are here from the GlenPharmer Distillery. How are you guys today?
We're great.
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having us.
It's so exciting to have you. We loved having a local connection, and no more local than Franklin itself on Franklin Radio, so we really appreciate your time. First, we'd just like you to talk about your unique background and how this whole GlenPharmer thing was born, if you could tell our listeners.
Sure. Well, if you're not familiar, Beth and I are both pharmacists. So that's how we met. We're chemistry lab partners in pharmacy school a long time ago, without getting into ages. And do you want to speak about how we came to do the distillery?
So this is something that, again, we're both pharmacists, but for years, Pat has talked about opening a distillery, and it goes back to 2004. He's like, Beth, gosh, I would love to get out of healthcare, open a distillery. And I'm like, yeah. And then he just kept talking about it. And through the years, he said, my vision for this is, this building, the old Encontro building, granite building, heavy timber. And I'm like, yeah, that would be really cool. It's a really neat building. So he continued to talk about it. And then in 2018, he went to Moonshine University, which is a real place. It's in Louisville, Kentucky. And for him, if he was going to do this, he just wanted to learn everything he could about what he would need to know. So he often actually jokes it's the degree he's most proud of. So he has a pharmacy degree, a business degree, and his 1-week certificate from Moonshine. So he came back from that and wrote up a business plan, and then went up and down the 495 corridor looking for space. And this building that he had talked about was quietly for sale, and it had just gone on the market the week before. It was like, okay, you've warned me, you've talked about this for years, and oh my gosh, this is the vision, and it just so happens to be for sale. So we put in an offer in the building in September of 2018, and then we closed in April of 2019, and then started doing the build out, and our timing wasn't great. Yeah. Construction for a distillery and all that, everything was all ready. We got our certificate of occupancy in March of 2020. And of course, we all know what happened then, but we feel really quite lucky because we got our certificate of occupancy the Friday before the governor shut everything down. Had we not gotten that, we could not have continued we couldn't have continued. So we feel very lucky. The distillery was considered an essential business. So our distillers were actually able to start distilling. Unfortunately, our restaurant staff, we just thought in a couple of weeks, it'll be okay, but it didn't happen. So we officially opened in May of 2020 for takeout. And we also feel lucky because we have the covered bridge, we have the patio. So we didn't have to figure out a way of trying to have outdoor dining in a parking lot. So then we opened for outdoor dining in June.
Well, I have been a big fan of both the restaurant as well as your products that people can find and buy and use at home pretty much since you've opened. So it has been I was telling Beth this the other day when I bumped into her, that I'm very much looking forward to this interview because this has been just a place that my friends and I and my family and I that we go to for dinners and drinks and all sorts of fun stuff. So it's been really lovely to see the development of the business, and not only the quality of the food, but to sort of watch the growth of your line of spirits as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit, that you've got all sorts of fun things that you've been making and that people can then get their hands on.
Thank you. Thank you for your support and just for supporting us, especially as we grow.
So being born and raised in Franklin, I always talk to a lot of I don't want to say old timers, but people who've been here their whole life. And I said to one gentleman, I said, tell me about this GlenPharmer building. What's the history about it? The only thing I heard going way back was in like the late 1880s. It was like a hat factory. It was originally a hat factory.
Right.
Have
Mhm.
you researched that building and how
Yeah.
historic it is to the town?
So the area between Foxborough and Franklin, Massachusetts was, as I understand it, once known as the straw hat capital of the world. So at a time in the 20s and 30s when men used to wear those types of hats, these mills were largely producing them in large quantities. And then they moved on to other textiles as those trends changed. At one point, they were making material for women's shoes. And then ultimately in 2019, when they kind of wound down the mill operations, they were making ski and snowboard straps to carry skis and snowboards.
Interesting.
Yeah. We always thought it would be a neat building for a distillery. And on the one hand, it looks like it is. It's not really ideally suited for a distillery. A distillery, just because of the weight of all the equipment and the liquid, it should be on a slab of concrete. So to have a basement underneath the distillery production floor is unusual. But as Beth mentioned, it's a granite heavy timber building, and we still had to reinforce it, but structurally to be able to sustain the operations, but it looks the part. So we like that.
So, Patrick, Beth said that you have had this sort of desire to start a distillery for quite a long time. Where did that come from? Does it have anything to do with your pharmacy background or something else?
I mean, maybe a little bit. I mean, first distilled alcohol in pharmacy school, but it probably came, as Beth mentioned, back in 2004. I was actually strangely stuck on a Caribbean island after a hurricane, and there was no power. There was a curfew. And so at night, you had dinner at local restaurants where every meal was chicken, vegetables, and because there's no power, there's no ice, it was whiskey. And at that time, that wouldn't have been my drink of choice. But as with anything, the more you're exposed to something, the more you come to appreciate it. And it was something that I grew to appreciate. First Scotch whiskey, then Irish whiskey. And then in 2007, I had my first American whiskey. I was not a big bourbon drinker at that time. It was actually a single malt, American single malt whiskey. And that was kind of when the light bulb went off, like,
Nice.
you can make this and you don't have to be in Ireland or Scotland. And that's kind of what started it.
I always love to hear people's aha moment. Like, what
Yeah.
was it that
Mhm.
lit that, set that light bulb off in your head?
Yeah, it was actually Stranahan's Colorado whiskey.
All right.
Still remember it. Yeah, they still do a great job. They're
So,
phenomenal.
when you can remember exactly what it was all those years later, that it really had this like transformative effect on something in your life.
Yeah.
Every time I go to your restaurant and distillery, as a business guy, I'm always thinking, I can't imagine how you came up like with the plan to start it. I know you say to Beth, hey, let's start this thing, but I mean, it's a restaurant and a distillery. How did you plan what to start first? I mean, so much equipment to buy, you had structure of the building. How did you do all that?
So it's a very good question. So one of the biggest challenges in starting a distillery is the cash flow related to the beginning of operations. You really have no brand awareness. You have no inventory at that point in time. You have no distribution, and so you have no customers. There's really, it's a challenge to have cash flow. And so one of the things that we thought we would do to solve for that difficult business problem is to essentially start a second difficult business, which is that if we paired it with a restaurant and we executed that well, then essentially we'd have our first customer. And that has been the kind of symbiotic relationship that exists between, it's technically our tasting room, because legally that's what it is. That's why we can't serve beer or wine. We run it like a restaurant, and people are often surprised that we don't serve beer or wine, even though they made the reservation at a distillery. But legally, that's the reason. We aren't allowed to serve beer or wine. And so we knew that if we could execute it well and create a destination experience that people hopefully would enjoy, that would also simultaneously give us a vehicle for putting our spirits out there. And thankfully, that's what's happened. We've been very fortunate to not only have a talented team of distillers, but we have a talented team of chefs, cooks and servers and bartenders.
I'm really glad you brought up the fact that in your restaurant, you don't serve beer and wine. And that has always been, at least something from all the people that I follow on social media, creates a little consternation for people. Why go to a restaurant when the only thing that you can drink is water or cocktails or mocktails? And I'm glad that you explained it, because for a lot of people, they're like, well, I want a glass of wine. Well, you can't have a glass of wine. Have this wonderful cocktail instead.
Well, we try to, when we explain to folks, it's like kind of like when you go to a winery, you don't necessarily expect to get beer. When you go to a brewery, you don't necessarily expect to get wine. But for whatever reason, people just think a distillery has everything.
Yeah.
A distillery doesn't have everything.
Because I think people see it as a restaurant before they see it as a distillery, maybe.
You're absolutely, absolutely correct.
And because the restaurant is so good, I think that the restaurant has really gained a good reputation. And then the fact that it is, I don't want to say it's secondary to the distillery, unless you would say that's secondary to the distillery. But, it's a different concept than I think that people are used to.
Yeah, I mean, the two really go hand in hand, and we intentionally want them to kind of feed off of each other. And the distillery has developed products literally from our bar program's experience. Similarly, we've developed cocktail recipes, but also food recipes that have evolved from our spirits. So we do try to create an experience that hopefully people enjoy, where they can have what we call a polished dining experience, something where you don't have to get dressed up to have a very nice meal, but at the same time, it is special, or at least we try to make it special.
I'm glad we're finally talking about the food, and Kim is on the show. I'm just the eater on the show. But I love that the menu really does complement the cocktails. So can you talk a little bit to our listeners about some of the signature dishes or some of the signature pairings that you offer on the menu at the restaurant?
We spend a lot of time each season kind of planning out what's going to evolve for the next season. And certainly there are dynamics related to the cocktail program where you want things to be bright and fresh, but the same thing really holds true for food in restaurants that try to change their menu seasonally. I'll say our executive chef, Kevin, and our sous chef, who's also Kevin, they very much like to change things up. There have been some staples that have always stayed on the menu from really day one. We've had both on the cocktail side as well as on the food side.
Chicken and waffles.
Yeah, chicken and waffles.
I love those chicken and waffles.
Yeah, the short rib bites, the farmer flatbread.
Octopus,
yeah.
That was one of the dishes, that when we first were discussing with our chefs about developing a menu, we wanted to have things that would be familiar and yet something a little bit different that maybe you couldn't get in a restaurant that was, currently had an offering in the area. So we tried to make it approachable and yet a little bit of a stretch so that the flavor profiles were different. And, whether right or wrong, that's what we try to do in all of the recipes.
Yeah, I love the seasonal thing. I know my kids always get mad because they love something and they go and you change the season and the something's off.
Yeah.
But then they find
mine
something
too.
new and they're
Sure. Yeah.
Asking us to bring back things. And I think that's part of what, in order to stay on people's radar screen, you have to keep things interesting. And part of it is you don't know if what you're going to come in for this time is going to be there, based on what changed last time. So,
but that keeps it interesting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to us on The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark and Kim, and today we have special guests Patrick and Beth Downing from GlenPharmer Distillery in Franklin, Massachusetts. You can find information about them and their restaurant and distillery at glenfarmer.com, as well as on social media at GlenPharmer. You can find more information about Mark and myself on our website, thewww.wine, and on social media at The Wonderful World of Wine. Welcome back, everyone. We are Mark and Kim for The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are here with owners of GlenPharmer Distillery and Restaurant in Franklin, Massachusetts, Patrick and Beth Downing. We've been talking about the restaurant, the food concepts, the cocktail menu, how all of those things kind of change seasonally. But I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk to you about your spirits specifically, because you started this in 2020 as the world was falling apart for COVID, but but you started with certain spirits and you have expanded your line. So I was hoping you could tell our listeners kind of what your focus was at the very beginning and how that has grown and developed as the last 5 or 6 years have gone by.
The beginning part is fairly straightforward, and it's kind of like standard operating procedure for a distillery, unless you're opening strictly as a whiskey distillery. When you start a distillery, there's lots of decisions that you have to make, and one of them is when you first start, are you going to make or are you going to buy your whiskeys? And the reason that's an important decision is because unless you're going to buy your whiskeys, then chances are when you open to the public, you're not going to have whiskey available because they need to barrel age for whatever length of time you're willing to accept or what you think is appropriate. So for us, we decided that we were going to make our spirits. We were not going to buy them. So when we opened, we did not actually have an offering of whiskeys available to the public. So that necessarily kind of drives your product development at that stage. You're dealing with white spirits. So things like vodka, gin. In our case, we do an agave spirit that most people think of as tequila, but we can't call it tequila because we make it in Franklin, Massachusetts, not in Jalisco or one of 4 neighboring states in Mexico, and rum. So that's kind of where the initial decision making came. And then we started the process of making whiskeys, knowing that we would have a future offering for whiskeys. And then probably the evolution from the cocktail program.
Right. So our initial products, we've changed. Like our rum used to be a white rum. Then we started barrel aging it and then adding spices. So over time, we don't make, because we have so many SKUs now because we've created so many other spirits. For our flavored vodkas, we did start off with Bog, which is our vodka with cranberries. We get our cranberries from Deacon's Farm in Carver, Mass. And then our ghost pepper. So one of the things, again, because at our restaurant, which is our tasting room, which is an extension of our distillery, we can only sell what we make. So for our bar program, making cocktails, like making an espresso martini, like we can't use Bailey's, we can't use Kahlua. So the bartenders are steeping vodka in vanilla and espresso. So one of our first spirits to be created as a result, literally, of the bar program was Bean, which is our vodka with Madagascar, vanilla, and espresso. And so what happened is our distillers created it and we tried it, and they were, it was just going to be for the bartender. And he was like, oh my God, we can't just give this to the bar. We have to apply for a label and we got to bottle this. So that's how Bean was created. And then Dolly, which is our vodka with pineapple, our bartenders would be cutting pineapple, putting it in the vodka, letting that sit. And again, having these 5-gallon containers. So again, our distillers created Dolly.
I don't know if you're familiar with what a Dolly is. If you've ever sat at a bar,
I am familiar with what a Dolly is. I don't know if our listeners are. Why don't you describe it?
So
because it's really fun to see.
If you've ever sat at a bar and noticed that a large glass vessel, usually with a spigot on it, with layers of pineapple in it, and it appears to be in liquid, that liquid is vodka. So they're making a Dolly, which is the pineapple infused vodka. We did that as well, and they're very popular. Most bars will tell you that do it, that they're very popular. But to do it correctly, it's a fair amount of work. And in order to create it without the bitter part of the pineapple, which is the core, you got to core the pineapple, and it just takes up a lot of space and a lot of effort. And so because they were so popular, we decided that we had to, for all intents and purposes, commercialize it and figure out a way to scale this. And so that's how we presented it to the distillers. And that was another product that came from the bar program.
Yeah. And then our most recent one is Blues, which is our vodka with blueberry. And the funny thing is, do distillery tours and tastings, and people would always say, oh, why don't you do a blueberry vodka? And it's like, well, no, at this point, we already have like 8 SKUs. It's too much. But what happened last summer is our bartenders created 2 cocktails on our summer cocktail menu using blueberries. So they would cook down the blueberries, and they were so popular that they were cooking down a lot of blueberries. So then our distillers created Blues, again, as a way to make it easier for our bar program.
the whole sourcing of, say, like bourbon. You could have bought juice to get started. You could have bought juice from anywhere and brought it in and called it your own. It's very common in the
Right.
industry. So
It is.
even at that, you had a decision to make before you started. And now I know the bourbon is kicking in. You know, I've toured and been in the cellar. It's very unique down there. Have you noticed anything in particular about your storage of the bourbon barrels where there's specific sites in that building that are beneficial for aging?
Well, I mean, one of the things I'll say we were a little concerned. So it is an old granite heavy timber mill building. So the temperature in the basement, which is where we store our whiskeys and all of the spirits that we age in barrels, tends to be fairly consistent. There are certainly fluctuations, but not wide fluctuations. It's important in barrel aging to have fluctuations in humidity and temperature because those are what drive expansion and contraction of the oak wood cells. And that expansion and contraction allows the alcohol to absorb into the cells of the oak and be expressed back out, which is what allows the oak barrels to contribute in the significant way that they do during the barrel aging process. So we were concerned about that, but we found that there is enough fluctuation. Additionally, if we open the doors in the winter and in the summer, that we can influence it. We don't have extreme heat, and yes, we do have sometimes extreme cold, but it's worked surprisingly well. So we're very pleased with how that worked out. The one thing that has been a very pleasant surprise is that the humidity is relatively constant. So our angel share has been quite low. So if you're not familiar, there's a natural evaporation that occurs of the alcohol through the wood barrel as it ages. And that loss of alcohol is known as the angel share. We've had a surprisingly low level of angel share. So that's great for our yields.
I'm glad you mentioned the angel share thing because I ask a lot of geeky questions. It gets Kim mad a lot of times, but
No, it doesn't.
I'm really interested in, and I'm sure you're not interested in it, but the tax thing. So you mentioned when you make alcohol, you're reporting it, someone is getting tax money on it, and then you put it in a barrel. Are you always paying when it's in storage every year on that barrel, even though it's evaporating, or do you only pay once it's filled?
Once it's filled. So
just one time.
Right. So it's work in process while you're creating it or while it's aging. So
then it evaporates. You pay tax on what evaporates. So that's good for you.
Yes. I mean, well, in theory, you'd rather pay tax on it and have more volume.
Right.
But at the end, the worst case scenario is you're paying tax on something that you're actually losing. So in this particular case, we use software to track the volumes that go into barrels, what we're filling, the evaporation, the loss. So all of that is tracked and is reported to the government as part of the tax process.
So is your evaporation, like the average is like what, 3% a year typically for angel share?
Typically it's higher in the first 2 years, and then it tends to be about 3% every year after the first 2 years. And we're experiencing a lower rate than that. So,
do you have to pay anything to the town of Franklin as far as tax for making the alcohol, or is it just a standard licensing?
No, we pay federal excise tax. We pay state excise tax. For the town, it's really local meals and sales tax.
I love this whole idea that so much of the new development of product has come from your bar program, that, there was this need that was addressed, and just to make it easier on the bartenders for all those wonderful cocktails. But one other thing that I have always found very interesting about your bar program is the use of the combination of multiple spirits that you make to create these new cocktails. So you might have one that's got the pineapple and the rum with it, and you use a lot of like syrups and other flavors. How often do you change your cocktail program? Is it quarterly? Is it every couple months? What's the time frame?
We do it seasonally. So spring, summer, fall, winter, and
specials in between.
Specials. Yeah, we do specials on the weekend. Yeah.
So we usually try to involve all of the bar staff. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll divide up the menu. As we contemplate a new menu, we know the number of drinks that we want to offer on a standard menu. Those are in addition to all the basics. In other words, a martini is not something that we per se put on our menu. It's just an offering. So we know how many we want to have, and we want to have every spirit that we offer represented in the menu. So every spirit needs to have at least one cocktail in each, cocktail menu revision. So generally what we'll do is we'll divide it up and we'll ask everyone to kind of pick the spirits they want to work with, and then
we get to taste them, which is fun.
And it's creating. And
absolutely
everybody
fun.
seems to like it, and then you give feedback on it. And there's different elements to it. The key to a well-crafted cocktail is having it be a balanced cocktail, and that means that there are different elements that need to be incorporated. So you have then, to offset the alcohol, you have dilution. So dilution could be water, it could be soda, it could be juice, it could be mixers. You have sweet, and then you have to have something to offset the sweet, which could be sour, it could be bitters. So you have these different dynamics that are playing against each other. And if you incorporate them well, then you should come up with a balanced cocktail that should be enjoyable to drink.
When we met I was asking Kim before the show, I think it was 2021 or just after you had opened, you started to distribute the liquor to local stores. And I appreciate.
And you're one of the first.
Yes,
thank you.
Well, we appreciate you. That's one of the things I wanted to say, is that the support you give to small business like myself is just really appreciative in this business, because a lot of times the giants in the industry could care less if I'm selling their product. And I think, the relationship we built up is just really good for the industry. But when you walked in the door, you were holding a bottle that I was just visually mesmerized by. Can you explain to the listeners the idea why you selected the bottle and the story behind it, how the uniqueness of it?
Sure. So as we kind of spoke about earlier, Beth and I are both pharmacists. And so when you're, again, trying to start a distillery, you do have to be aware of shelf presence and trying to secure space on a liquor store's shelf, just like yours, and being able to, as they say, stand out in a crowd. So we did spend a lot of time discussing bottle attributes. We put a lot of thought into the design of the bottle. So the design at its base is a takeoff of the apothecary bottles. Beth and I had a pharmacy that was the oldest continuously operated pharmacy in the state of Massachusetts until sadly we sold it in 2004. But we had a lot of these old apothecary bottles. And so my brother Tim is actually an architect, and I sent him these little videos and pictures of different spirit bottles, but also these apothecary bottles that were antiques. And he designed the bottle.
We also tried to keep in mind, and even talking to bartenders, especially female bartenders, for you, what's a good bottle for you? Because, some bottles are square and fat, and they're harder for a woman's hand. It's typically smaller than a man's. So trying to make it easy for a bartender to be able to mix drinks with as well. So trying to keep that in mind.
So the diameter of the bottle is actually, whether right or wrong, we tested it with female bartenders at length to come up with the actual diameter. It's 3 1/8 inch. And we wanted to make sure it was something that was easy to handle and could be grabbed quickly and manipulated quickly.
I really love that. I'm sure I've complained to Mark about this before, about stemless wine glasses. And I have little hands because I am not a very big person. And I have a very hard time with stemless wine glasses because the bowl is just so big. So the fact that you took that into consideration and the usability of the product behind the bar, even though you were, at this point, it sounds like you were going into retail stores, but that you were thinking ahead for usage in many different environments.
Yes. And we had to spend a lot of time on the closure as well, because we use a glass closure, which is unusual in the spirits industry. It wasn't unheard of in the wine industry. There were white wines that were using a glass closure, but to adapt that into a spirits bottle in order to get the apothecary kind of look was unique. So we had to make sure, people obviously want to make sure that there's no chipping and that it's not going to create a hazard, a danger. And thankfully, we were able to come up with a design that satisfied all those requirements and has worked quite well.
So Patrick and Beth, now that our listeners want some beverages, and Farmer, talk about distribution. Do you do online sales to ship to people listening all over the world, or in what states are you in now?
Wish you could. So the long laws for spirits are very different than the laws for beer and wine. And so by and large, direct to consumer DTC is not allowed for spirits. Now that is starting to change. States like Kentucky have passed laws. California, I believe they've passed it. A lot of times, if you remember back when wine became available direct to consumer and wineries could ship, a lot of those laws that passed in states were based on reciprocation, meaning you could ship to one state as long as that state allowed the reciprocal shipping to the other state. Those dynamics really don't exist, and the laws don't allow for the shipping of spirits direct to consumer. There are some online platforms that have found compliant ways to deal with that, and we're in discussions with those so that we can offer. We do receive a lot of requests from, outside of our area of distribution. And essentially, those online platforms have relationships with liquor stores in each state. And essentially, it's the liquor stores that are selling it as opposed to us. It looks like we are, but it's really a liquor store.
All right.
So for us, we're widely distributed in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and we just entered Connecticut in January. And so, throughout Massachusetts, and any liquor store in those three states can ask their distributor to bring it in if they wanted to order it.
Looking back in 2020, did you think you would be distributed in 3 states 5 years after?
I mean, I think we hoped.
We hoped, yeah.
It's definitely in Mark and Kim, I'm sure you're aware of this. The alcohol industry is in a bit of a downturn right now. Younger consumers are not drinking as much. And so it's a challenging time for an emerging brand like ourselves to further gain distribution. We're fortunate enough we have a great relationship with our distributor, and that has allowed us to go from one state to Rhode Island and to Connecticut, and we're hopeful that that'll allow us to continue to grow.
And you mentioned the younger consumers. You do so much social media, these creative drink ideas. When the Patriots were in the playoffs, you came up with a Patriots drink. I think you're really drawing in, not to mention, we haven't talked about your event space. You're bringing in younger generations to have their weddings there. Do you want to talk about how you're doing events?
Sure. So we do events in our upper floor event space, and that kind of evolved as well. It was such a big endeavor to build out the distillery that we're like, we'll finish the first floor first and we'll figure out the second floor later. And then our daughter got engaged in December of 2020, and it's like, well, I guess we'll finish the second floor and have your reception be on the second floor, and we'll do it. So she got married in February of 2022. We finished the second floor in January of 2022. So since 2022, we've done weddings, we've done corporate events, showers, birthday parties, and you're right. I mean, it is kind of, they all kind of help each other. Like it's coming to the restaurant, the distillery, the event space. They all complement each other, and so that has been helpful as well. And it's neat because in our event space, you can actually see the distillery. So our stills are so big, we had to cut a hole in the second floor. So you can actually see the vodka column, coming up through the top, and we have a drink rail around it. So it's a neat focal point for events to be able to see this shiny equipment coming through.
And I think they allow us to gain exposure to people who otherwise might not come to the distillery. So certainly for weddings, but also for corporate events, people are coming from faraway places. So that's been very helpful.
That was one of the things I wanted to ask you, as far as you've toured hundreds of distilleries, I'm sure, out there, Patrick and Beth. And do you consider, or do you like the idea of the thing grain to glass idea? Or what do you consider, comparing to if someone was to tour a major distillery, what do you consider your distillery? Differences between these huge distilleries and your distillery? What would you say separates?
Well, I mean, certainly I would say part of it is our batch production. So you're dealing with very large distilleries. They're dealing with continuous column distillation. So they're able to produce in massive scale. Our stills have the largest production capacity in New England. That said, we don't use it because we're still a relatively young brand, but hopefully we'll use it to capacity soon by running running multiple shifts and running it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But for now, the way that we do batch distillation, and then we also offer spirits in the 5 major spirit categories. And a lot of distilleries tend to specialize, whether it's in whiskeys or whether it's in gins or whatnot. But, again, if you're trying to run a business, you don't want to alienate anyone based on a personal preference of drinks. So we try to produce in the major categories. And if you think about it, one of our goals was to create a restaurant. Well, one of the most popular cocktails out there, the second most popular at the moment, is still a margarita. And if we didn't distill agave, we wouldn't be able to produce a margarita, which would be, a big absence in a cocktail program when you can't serve beer or wine.
Especially when you come back to that seasonality part of it. There are some spirits that are much more winter focused, like some of your spiced rum or your bourbon. And then, when you're thinking about the margaritas and the Dolly for other things that might be a little more warm weather. So I think it's a smart business decision.
I don't know if it's smart, but it was it
was a delicious business decision.
Yeah, we are able to. So on our second floor event space, we actually can do beer, wine upstairs. That the town gave us a separate street address to allow us to be able to do beer and wine upstairs. So
town and state.
So whenever we do events, we always are very careful to explain it to the host, because we tell them, you or your guests can go downstairs, but if you try to go downstairs with beer or wine, we'll stop you because they're separately licensed. So we're careful with that. So
great. One of the things I find interesting, and you both live in Franklin as well. Franklin's become like this east-west type town, and I'm being on the east side, you're on the west side, and people come in and they'll see your product and they'll be like, "Oh, that's that place on the other side of the town." It always amazes me how Franklin has become this like huge town now where we're east and west. And heaven forbid you can't go west anymore. Thank you for everything you do, Beth and Patrick. Thank you for your time. And if people are here in Franklin, please check them out if you've not gone there to eat or drink. If you're anywhere else in the world, look at their website, GlenPharmer.com. You can get some real nice merchandise sent to you anyway, a nice shirt and hat from Franklin at least, and look for them somehow online to get the product in the future. So we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Mark.
It's great talking
to you.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark, Lenzi, and Kim Simone. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find us on our website, thewww.wine. We are on all social media at The Wonderful World of Wine. Today, our special guests, Beth and Patrick Downing. You can find them online at glenfarmer.com and on Instagram at GlenFarmer. Cheers.
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 Wine, wine.